We were three co-founders, all under 28 years old, and we were bidding on what was going to be one of the largest plants in the world at the time.
When most people saw deserts, today's guest saw solar fields.
The idea that solar was even going to exist here was, out of the ordinary.
Sami Khoreibi pioneered clean energy in the region with Enviromena, taking it from a startup to one of MENA's leading renewable energy firms. Today, he's tackling the global water crisis as founder of Wisewell and backing the next wave of entrepreneurs as founding partner of Incubayt.
I think the attitude from day one, be dynamic, be quick, and just figure it out.
And the story is still unfolding.
Brilliant people from all over the world coming here to build companies, and our goal should be to build global champions.
Let's get into it. Sami, most people don't leave legacy industries and stable careers to start a clean energy company, especially in MENA and in the early 2000s. Can you tell me more about how you took that leap?
When I moved to the UAE in 2007, the idea that solar was even going to exist here was pretty, out of the ordinary. I was living in Canada, where I was the co-founder of an oil and gas company, which we had just listed on the stock market. But one thing about being in oil to me was it didn't feel young enough. And being in oil and gas in Toronto just felt like an industry that had almost, fully hit its point of maturity. To some extent, if you look at it from, an even larger perspective, maybe was even starting to see its decline, right? Although it was booming and peaking at that point in time. And so I was on a trip actually for work to Abu Dhabi in 2007 when I learned about the kind of, initial ideas and thoughts of the Masdar initiative. And back then, the UAE was a place of significant growth like it is today. But it was still, I would say, more, for lack of a better term, frontier than it was today, right? So it was a bigger jump to move at that point in time. But looking at the track record, looking at some of the earlier investment initiatives that had taken place, it was clear to me that something big was about to happen, right? And so, that was a very compelling reason for me to pick up, convince my roommate and another friend at the time who became the co-founders to, leave our careers and our jobs in older sectors and move to Abu Dhabi to start the first solar company in the region. And I think we didn't predict how the journey would go, but I think we were pretty bang on in terms of the realization of that potential, right? And fast forward to today, one of the fastest growing and one of the biggest markets on a per capita basis, and even actually on a general basis for solar and for renewable energy. And it was pretty awesome to be there from kind of day zero, I guess.
And I'd love to know more about the story. I believe the original plan was you guys were aiming for an IPO within a short time frame that led to an acquisition later on. So I'd love to know how the original plan was in comparison to what actually happened and key lessons you learned along the way.
The first lesson is, as a 27-year-old, your ability to predict the cycles in the market are slim to none. And I think even as a 45-year-old, the same remains, right? I think it's very hard to really to understand timing in the market. So, I had previously started the company, as I mentioned before, the oil company, and that was called Candax Energy in Toronto. In 2005, we founded that company. Within, a year and a half, we had already listed it on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So my perception and my reality was that, you start a company, you come up with a good idea, and within a very short period of time, you have a liquidity event, whether that's a sale or whether that's a listing. So, our business plan, when we put together, I recall the deck back then, it was called Project Shams, which translated very poorly in English because it was actually read as Project Shams, right? But actually, I think we realized that we quickly had to change the name to Enviromena. That, idea was it's going to be 3 years, we're going to realize the market and things are going to grow very quickly. Now, this was 2007, shortly after we had the global financial crisis, and things took a lot longer. But that was a blessing in disguise because over that period of time, we didn't just get to watch one market start. We got to watch the region really get seeded with different projects across multiple countries. And we were fortunate to be the first the first entry into 7 markets. So we built the first grid-connected plant in 7 markets across the region.
How did you approach those different markets? Did you have a playbook, or was it starting all over in a different market?
There were some elements that were probably repeatable in terms of scale, right? So we had a certain set amount of engineering that would be universal across all different markets. But there were definitely, very, very different flavors and varieties of what the expectations are, the way of doing business, whether that's from a bureaucratic perspective, through to even kind of a local availability of partners, of talent, of construction equipment. Just to give you an example, so we did this incredible project in Morocco, where we were working with Masdar and the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, and along with partnership with the utility in Morocco, where we had to provide electricity to the last 2% of the population, or part of the last 2% of the population that didn't have access to power. So that was 17,000 individual homes across Morocco, where we were typically doing a kind of a one-size-fits-all system that had a few solar panels, a refrigerator, USBs, and and some lights as well, right? So really providing the basic needs of power across. And some of that was easy, right? Some of that we were building close to urban centers with infrastructure where we could reach using traditional vehicles. But there was a part of kind of the project that took place in a mountainous area where we couldn't actually get to the actual locations and to the houses by road. So we really had to improvise, and our engineering team actually built a harness. The mode of transportation in that area is donkey. So we actually built a harness that was perfectly designed to fit 2 solar panels on either side, and was actually delivering the solar panels by donkey to the system. And the images are just incredible, right? Because that is the mode of transportation in the area. You have to be flexible. You have to understand that the way I do it, or the way we've always are used to doing it, is not always going to be the case in terms of implementation. And it's always that last 2-3% of difference that can make a huge impact in terms of your ability to plan, in terms of your ability to execute. And we were very fortunate that I think the attitude from day one, from ourselves and from our partners, was be dynamic, be quick, and just figure it out, right? It doesn't matter how you're going to do it, figure it out. So that example is one that I think really kind of resonated with me in terms of the unexpected challenges you're going to face. When designing this project from our office in Abu Dhabi, we never thought, is there going to be a road network, or are we going to have to design a donkey harness to get the panels to there? But we did, and it worked.
And I think what's interesting is the concept of adaptability. While we hear it all the time in the business landscape, I think I was just reflecting on the last year. If there's anything I really want to kind of hammer down, is into myself as well, be as flexible and as adaptable. I'm not talking about looking at what we did in the last quarter or the last 6 months, but week on week basis, look at how experiments can change. And what I'm trying to kind of implement is the same way tech teams ship out new updates every 2 weeks with every sprint, the same way all departments should be doing the same thing, because things are constantly evolving. But with that comes risk as well. So I'm curious to know, can you tell me about how your relationship with risk has changed and evolved with time?
My core relationship with risk as an entrepreneur hasn't changed, right? I think that like the initial guttural reaction of what we should do, or experimentation in the context of whether that's starting a new business or looking at putting a completely new department in an organization, or trying to sell a new product within an organization, that really still exists at the core. But it's how you manage and deploy it that I think that over time, the lessons I've learned is pivots, or your ability to take a risk, whether that's on a project or a product, or even on hiring the right person. You don't have to do it very large all at once. You can actually A/B test very effectively in a manner which allows you to gather the data of the implications of that risk you take in a lot more of a studied way, in the context of really siloing whatever you're doing. So I'll give one example, which could be in the context of hiring new people, right? So when we started our first companies, the idea of fractional didn't exist, right? And although there are some key roles which often start with C, right? Whether that's fractional financial officer, chief financial officer, product officer, or marketing officer, all those different roles are hugely important to an organization as it starts to scale. But ultimately, the cultural fit, I think the style of work and the quality of work will drastically vary, obviously, from person to person, and will vary from company to company. So when we are, now trying to hire people in very senior roles, what we love to do initially is have this engagement period where your risk is fractionalized, right? So you've hired a CFO or a CPO or a CMO, but your initial period with them is one which is the ability to understand how they work with the organization, and to be frank, allows them to understand how the organization works with them to ensure that you have the right fit. And on the other side, with product and everything, we're in a very fortunate time where you can release something, A/B test it very quickly and get the feedback cycle super quickly. So you don't have to do big pivots, big changes, big investments. Your ability to micro pivot and, I'd say turn around a bit more slowly and a bit more studied is a lot easier with all the tools that are out there, especially on the digital side of things.
Sami, since you brought up hiring, that's something everyone talks about because having a great team either makes or breaks a company. What are things you look for when building teams around you to execute your vision?
Since our company was acquired in 2018, on one side, I've become a very active and hands-on investor in companies, typically around the theme of sustainability and technology, but we've kind of broadened that aperture to look at just really good founders in sectors that we like that are doing good for the world. It doesn't just have to be sustainability. And on the second side, I'm also the founder of Wisewell, right? A water technology company that's focusing on changing the way people, drink water, right? And going from bottled water to purified water for multiple reasons. And when I, look at investors now, and it's a similar theme. When I look at investments now, and I look at the co-founders and the founders of the businesses I invest in, I really look for absolute obsession, right? Like they need to be, that's pretty much all they think about, right? So even when I have conversations with them, how was your day, whatever, everything goes back to the business. And you kind of see that, and I remember it because I had it, right? And I still do have it, but you have this kind of fire inside where everything somehow goes back to your mission and what you're doing as a company. And that fire, I think was a bit diluted when we had the boom time of too much venture capital going into too many companies, which was happening kind of post-COVID, and there was a lot of founders that kind of came into the market, coming from different sectors, leaving their comfortable jobs. How we started this interview is like, what drove you? So a lot of people were driven to do it because it seemed very easy, and you didn't have to be so crazy to jump in and be a founder. And that was kind of what I call the mercenary founder, right? So those who are almost, come in as hired guns. They've got a strategy, we've put it together and it's going to hit like this. And for whatever reason, if it doesn't hit and things don't work, there's a bit of a panic with the mercenary founder, right? So over the boom time, I invested in kind of a multitude of different companies and stuff. And I noticed that it's that other kind of founder, which is the one that is just, no matter what happens, whatever the world throws at them, whatever challenges happen with their businesses, they will just keep at it. And, they'll be the ones calling, obsessing, how do we get through this problem? And I think there's a similar kind of DNA when you're building your core team, and those people who have to, and I don't want to be cliche and say like everyone has to share in the mission, but there has to be, a culture within your core team that absolutely believes in, the product, the mission, and the goal that you're getting to, right? And again, that will get everybody a lot more comfortable with the late nights, the ups and downs, the things that are not expected kind of being thrown your way, and truly will kind of, those dolls that when you hit them, they come back up, the clown toys, whatever they are, you almost have to be one of those, right? So like, no matter what happens, you just come back up as if nothing happened.
I'm going to start using that because I feel like life has been hitting me and I'm just trying to get back up. But in terms of who you invest in and what you look for, you talked about obsession, which is very, very important. Is that more important than domain expertise?
I would pick the obsession over the domain expertise because two things. One is domain expertise can be learned and domain expertise can be hired, right? And those two factors are critical. So when I'm going to go back in time to 2008 when we were bidding on our first solar project as Enviromena. We were 3 co-founders, all under 28 years old. And we were bidding on what was going to be one of the largest plants in the world at the time, right? It was a 10 megawatt plant, which was top 20 solar plants in the world. We were a brand new company. We had, all just kind of moved to Abu Dhabi. Our domain expertise to build that plant was limited. But our obsession to say we are going to A, win this project and B, build that plant on time was unmatched, right? So we were able to partner with one of the largest solar companies globally to, really get our credentials up as a consortium bidding on the project. We were able to very quickly, look at the global markets for hiring and hire a very senior solar engineer to bring on our team to help design and build the plant. And so domain expertise was hired. It was partnered with, but this group of obsessed founders who were just driven to win it and build it no matter what. You can't really just post an ad on LinkedIn and find that.
In terms of Enviromena, can you tell me more about the acquisition, the story behind it? How did it actually happen? Someone once told me a company should be bought and not sold. Does that match your experience? In
2017, we were 10 years into running the business, right? So I was a CEO, and my co-founders were the CCO and COO as well. So we had been at it for a long time, and again, this was a 3-year play, right? And we had brought in. We were the first recipient of what I'd call kind of tier 1 venture capital into the region. Back then, there was no ecosystem of capital in our own backyard, so we actually, as a UAE company, funny enough, had to go abroad to raise capital. And we went to the largest clean tech fund in Europe and the largest clean tech fund in the US at the time, ended up becoming investors. And shortly after, Masdar came in as a shareholder too. But at that time, I think we had a lot of investors that had been in the business for a long time. So we did always have this, although they weren't complaining, we had this sense of duty to our shareholders. And we had kind of set ourselves up over the last 2 years. We'd won some massive projects. And so we were kind of at a scale where we became very interesting to be acquired, right? So we were playing in kind of a league which was a lot more attractive in terms of potential buyers from all over the globe. And we caught the attention of kind of an advisory team that represented some large pension funds from the UK. And we knew some of the people that were actually, some of our advisors also worked very closely with the pension funds and the advisory teams. So there was already a deep insight from their perspective as to what we were doing, what we were building, and what kind of platform we could be for growth. And so, as you said, we were identified. We were bought, right? We weren't just being sold. So it was actually quite a funny story. So I got married in 2017, and we had a 3-day wedding party. And I remember on the second day, we received an email and a letter with a formal offer for the acquisition of the company. I think the timing was definitely celebratory already, and it was quite exciting. And I just remember being with my co-founders, everything, looking and saying, "Oh my God, we actually have a formal, binding offer to buy the company." And
you were getting married and getting acquired at the
same time. Yeah, exactly. It's that probably doesn't happen too often, but it was a very, very cool thing to happen. But on the first day of my honeymoon and our honeymoon in Tokyo, was the board meeting to go over all the 10,000 steps you need to complete to get that. So I was very blessed to have a team that was patient with me and said, look, we'll take over a lot of the initial due diligence stuff until you get back from the honeymoon. But again, that obsession that you have with founders, I didn't think it was in any way a burden to get on that call at 3:00 in the morning in Tokyo to speak with the acquirers and the team and bankers and everything. It was exciting.
The real question is, how did your wife feel about this?
She was happy, right? She was like, "This is great news for you. Something you've been building for years is coming to fruition." And she often not just shares, but is equally into things as much as I am. So when I come home with good news or to talk about potential competitor coming to the market, that kind of let's do this, let's get them, is actually kind of flows through the entire not just, and it's funny now, it even flows to our kids too, right? I think it's just part of the house that that you have a team, and that team happens to be what you're building as well. It's your family, it's what you're building, and it's that entire ecosystem around.
Absolutely. But let's go from the past to the present. I'd love to know about your current roles with Incubayt and your work at Wisewell as well, and why you decided to go back to entrepreneurship.
We 10 years we did projects from Mauritania to Oman, right across the entire region, which was incredible, but had its challenges and was somewhat exhausting when you look at it overall. When you're kind of done, you're like, I'm finally done with this. So I started Incubayt with kind of under the pretense that I'm going to take my learnings and capital and invest into entrepreneurs in the region that are really focused on missions that make the world a better place, right? And companies that are not just sustainable and kind of fluffy, but ones that actually hit a few things that I really am that I'm really focused on nowadays, is being better for the earth in terms of sustainability, but also a product that is actually better to use for the end user from day one. And generally, this is kind of something which I've gotten into recently, and it's one of the passions I have. Well, I've always had it in me, but I think I've started really looking at focusing on it commercially. Is from a design and UX perspective, how do you package sustainability, product, user experience in a way which is aligned with today's consumer? Because I've found that a lot of these sectors kind of neglect the UX, and it is hugely important if we want to deliver something which is going to be impactful to focus on how the end user engages with it. I started Incubayt under the pretense of investing in companies that do all of the above. And I've been fortunate to find some amazing companies, right? And I've invested in, I'll give, I'll throw a couple examples out. The Waste Lab, it was one of our first investments, which is, it's a food waste management company, and I'd hired them as a customer initially. So I was in our household, I wanted to teach my kids about composting at a young age. So we got this, I looked up, where can I find cool composting, or I didn't think there was such a thing as cool composting until, I got, we reach out to the Waste Lab and I get this package from them, and it's just a really good looking, it sounds odd, but like bin, right? That has a very clear set of instructions that anyone could follow. And then they started chatting with us on WhatsApp as when we're going to come pick up everything. And they started sending me reports. I'm like, it's really interesting. They actually made something that is, when I was growing up, a topic like composting was boring, right? But food waste management, they made it actually feel relevant. It made it feel like it was a casual conversation, but we're very, very good at presenting the impact of everything. So I'm like, I'd love to invest in this company. Let me see how I did, and reached out to the founders. Our team did via LinkedIn. We got in touch with them and found out that they had a 200-person waiting list. And I said, have you guys raised any capital? They said, no, we haven't. We actually both have full-time jobs. I said, you're doing this, you've got full-time jobs. And they were actually collecting the bins from each house. It was incredible what they were doing with such limited resources. And I convinced them to allow us to be their first investor.
Just on that, because you said they had their full-time jobs, but you still wanted to invest in them. I want to kind of dig deeper into that, because other investors would be like, okay, you have a full-time job. I'm not putting my money in because you're not committed, even though people might have other responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
Financial responsibilities. So what made you do that?
Going back to the obsession, right? I could sense the obsession. I mean, it was actually like, kind of bursting at the seams in terms of like, they wanted to do this. This is all they wanted to do. So I knew once the capital came in, once everything was there, that they would very quickly, spend more time and probably step away from their full-time roles into this. And, very shortly after our investment happened, one of the first founders, left their job, and the second one, a few months later did the same. So the writing was on the wall that once they had at least, a bit of a safety net, which was the capital we brought to the table, they would be comfortable in terms of doing this on a full-time basis. And the second one, just quick, was one of my former employees at Enviromena. He was heading up our business development, was always very into working with kind of technical tools and figuring things out using technology. And he's developed an AI platform that it's called Plano. And he basically is able to identify and unlock the size and actually, down to kind of the exact customer details of rooftop solar for like commercial industrial anywhere in the world. So he unlocks, cities at a time, and launched it out of here. But very quickly realized, hold on a sec, I'm getting a lot of interest from global markets. And now is starting to see more activity in the US and Europe, and, continues to have activity here. But as an example of when you're building a company in the region, it doesn't just have to be for the region, right? And in my opinion, it's a bit unfortunate that a lot of our founders here put a glass ceiling on themselves of like, I just want to be the biggest in the UAE or Saudi or Egypt. All amazing markets, but the world is a very big place, and the talent that we have here in the UAE, in Saudi, in the GCC is world-class, right? We've got brilliant people from all over the world coming here to build companies, and our goal should be to build global champions. And so that's kind of a theme that I'm really trying to instill into myself and into the companies we invest in, is don't just stop at, the GCC or the MENA. Have global ambitions.
And we're seeing more founders as well head in that direction. We see, for example, Calo just acquired companies in the UK, and that was kind of their foot in the market, in the UK market. So it's definitely great to see founders thinking in that direction. Tell me more about why you decided to go back to being an operator. So
I was investing in these businesses, and I was watching their journey and started getting, funny enough, I was getting a bit jealous, right? I'm like, I'm seeing the ups and downs, and I was like, oh man, I wish I could kind of be, doing it with you, despite the promise I had made to myself that I wouldn't, ever jump into operations again. When I started kind of getting the real itch of wanting to do something again, I knew I was going to do it, right? And ultimately I said, I want it to be not just a transaction, not just a business, but something that, and not something that could just be sold. It's something that I could actually continue doing until I retire. Looking at the landscape of where there are huge challenges in terms of our daily behaviors and ones that could be quickly impacted with today's technology, water was blatantly obvious. The way we drink water today is completely unsustainable for the planet. Last year, 600 billion plastic bottles ended up in landfills from the water sector. In the UAE alone, 4 billion bottles were in landfills. We are literally taking a container that is made out of hydrocarbons, typically filling it somewhere around the world, shipping it into where we drink it. We drink it in 500 milliliter single-use containers, and then 95% of the time, it's not even recycled. It's actually just thrown into landfills, right? So the entire value chain is expensive for the planet, it's expensive for our pocket. And so we designed a water purifier that doesn't have to be hidden in the back of the pantry. You could put it anywhere. And looks are great, but what else is very important to people, right? What's important is this thing actually working? And the majority of systems today don't tell you what's actually happening with the filter. And, fast forward today, we're in thousands of households in the UAE. We also have an incredible program, which is a leader for leader program. For every kind of all of our systems are connected. So for every liter of water that's produced by our wise well, we actually develop water filtration systems for people who lack water access. 2.2 billion people around the world lack access to clean water.
Can you tell me more about what are the challenges that you've faced along the way with developing the product, getting it out to customers?
One of the challenges was being able to hold until it's ready. And we do that with every model, right? So I always have a real urge to get some kind of version out before, as long as we've fixed the filtration stuff and it's safe. I'm like, let's go. But there's all the other stuff on the back end, the software, the systems, the sensors. So that's always a challenge. The other thing is actually, again, historically, when we were working in the solar business, it was very centralized in terms of decision making. You know, you build a solar power plant, it's a government and the utility that wants to build the plant. When you are selling a water purification system to an end user, it's the household, right? And so getting people to understand that it works, getting people comfortable with that kind of conversion from their old practice of drinking a bottle of water from the fridge or from the dispenser to, you know, kind of using the machine and the appliance to be able to dispense their water is a big jump, right? And I think it's funny, an interesting tidbit is they're fully connected to the internet, the machine. So we know that every wise well on average is touched 13 times a day in a household. That makes us the second most used device to the phone.
We talked a lot about business. Let's get to know the person behind Sami. What keeps you awake at night?
I'm very blessed. I sleep a lot better than I used to, and I think that's a function of probably, again, you know, this is not my first rodeo, so you kind of as a third time founder, right? And this is hopefully, you know, 2 exits, and hopefully, you know, now building something for the long term, having the resources and team and support mechanisms to know that you'll be able to get over the hump is critical. But sometimes actually, you know, making sure that you've instilled that message to those who have had less experience around you, who are part of your core team, is a real source of responsibility and, you know, the stress that will keep you up at night. And just making sure that not just you, but your peers and your core team are sharing the comfort and confidence that whatever challenge is in front of us tomorrow, and there's always a challenge in front of you, you'll be able to climb that mountain and get over to the other side. But in general now, you know, I think the most important things to me are really having the balance of ensuring that obsession still exists, but, you know, that obsession kind of has to grow. I've got 3 wonderful kids and a wonderful wife and a family, and making sure that, you know, your ability to make the most out of all of those opportunities is critical. So I'm not up at night, but I'm definitely sleeping less because you have to squeeze a lot more into the awakened hours. And it's wonderful, right? As long as one has the health and the energy to be able to do more, they might as well do it.
Let's just look ahead. Where are you going to place your personal bets for the next decade?
I'm making a conscious decision right now to invest less in terms of the number, but invest more in terms of the kind of time and effort on, you know, companies outside of Wisewell that I'm supporting. And I've actually recently announced that I'm going to be, you know, a judge on a show that's launching here in the UAE called The Final Pitch. And that is actually a really interesting opportunity because we are going to get to see a number of companies present themselves from different domains, myself and the other judges. And then we have the opportunity not just to invest in, but to mentor the companies. And I think that example being provided to a large audience across the region is, you know, hopefully highly motivational to burgeoning entrepreneurs. And with the AI tools that are out there, you can do a lot more with a lot less. So, you know, I'm very excited to be able to kind of publicly, hopefully push platforms that enable entrepreneurship. So I want to invest more time in really being out there and promoting entrepreneurs in the region, being able to deliver on their ideas, not just, again, here, but with global ambitions. I'm very excited about the future of the region and our ability to be pioneers in these kind of mega infrastructure projects, but at the same time, be able to build all the grassroots stuff and the startups that'll be able to grow and service the population, the companies, and everyone who are building out on this infrastructure. I don't think we could possibly be in a better place than this part of the world right now for the next 20 years.
If you were 21 today, what advice would you give yourself?
I would probably tell the younger version of myself to not really, don't take things overly personally when you're building out, when you're doing things, because at the end of the day, just keep your head down and go with the mission, but don't let your ego, your emotions overwhelm you while you're building in early days, because again, with the right team and partners, the ups and downs are there, but you can actually probably, you could do the same with a bit less emotion towards it and end up with the same result, but probably with a lot less peaks and troughs in terms of, how you felt along the way.
While I agree with that, it's just so hard to do it in practice when all you do or all you think about is this business. It's very hard to detach your emotions from it, right?
Yeah, you're right. And, I think one of the biggest catalysts for me was having kids, right? So understanding that no matter what, there's actually like bigger priorities out there. But it's also a motivational resource, right? Because you're not just doing it for yourself and for your ego or for your shareholders. You're kind of doing it for a bigger picture, whether it's a generation or for them themselves. And it changes your outlook on things. But you're right, it is hard to control it. But despite that, you can probably have mechanisms to release that energy. I probably would have exercised more. I would have, spent more time outdoors as opposed to just in the office, because you do get to the same result, but in a healthier way, ultimately.
Sami, it's been a pleasure. But to wrap it up, we'll have a quick rapid fire segment. I'll ask you Sami questions and just answer with the first thing that comes to mind. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Impatient, persistent, and delusional.
What's something you wish you invested in?
I wish I held on to my Apple shares when I bought them in 2007 when the iPhone came out. I invested in it, but I sold it at double, and I don't know how much it'd be worth now.
The biggest mistake someone can make while setting up a business?
Overhiring early.
What's one trend you completely underestimated?
Labubus.
You're literally, I think, the 3rd person who said that. Journey or destination? What matters more?
I think they're mutually inclusive. They're one and the same. Without the destination and a very clear picture of it, the journey is dictated by the destination and vice versa.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure was mine. Thanks.